It's it's much more expensive to get a new customer than to keep an existing one. I think, that's true. And like the um importance of that has really, I mean, with the multipliers that exist now, when you look at like, some of the customers I work with, their new revenue targets are, let's say for the new year, say 10 to 15 million, but their existing revenue to retain is in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mhm.
And so you really think about the work that you do to retain that revenue has now, just grossly magnified from what it used to be.
Right, right, absolutely. You were going to say.
Yeah, I think that's indeed true, right? We see this, all the time for let's say a $200 million company growing at 40%. Sales is bringing in 80 million with 80 reps, and then you have 25 CSMs doing 200 million,
That's right.
revenue retention and driving 80 of the 80 million. There's a lot of that comes from expansion as well. So you become responsible for really supporting and driving about 85 to 90% of the ARR that the company is going to end up with at the end of
Right.
the year.
And also, I think that unless the product is, and this, this is unfortunately more rare than maybe it ought to be, but unless the product is really a have to have, it's something you have to run your business. Salesforce, perfect example of that. You're not going to unplug that. I think that, increasingly, unless it's have to have, and you have the option of switching, that experience post sale is really important. And because if you're having a terrible experience and it's easy to switch and somebody can give you a better price, so it's not just that you have a lot of revenue to look after, it's that the switching costs for many types of software are really not that great. And unfortunately, and so unless you are fortunate enough to be selling a product that is, either have to have or very hard to unplug, then you sort of also hold up the that switching is a thing that customers do. I think more than they used to for economic reasons to save on their subscription fees. And so delivering a great experience post sale has become more important.
Right, like having CS as a strategic
Mhm.
differentiator.
Right. Or
Yeah,
whatever the post-sale experience is, right? That, it could, I mean, the best case is somebody says, oh, somebody's offering me, 20% less than you are, but I just love working with you and you take such
right.
care of me and you're such a trusted advisor that, you develop the stickiness through the relationship if you can't do it through the product. And not all products are going to be incredibly sticky no matter what you do. And the vast majority are, they're not just nice to haves, but, unfortunately, there's a lot of commoditization. And so it becomes an insurance policy as well to churn.
Absolutely. I think that also changes depending on the size of the company, right? The
Mhm.
strategic role that CS can play. And I'm curious, Diane, I know you have a lot of vast experience, but for a startup, how do you think the strategic role is maybe different, for a startup versus mid-market or larger size company?
Well, in a startup, I always refer to it as like everybody's getting by with a small group of ninjas, right? What I mean by that is, everyone's wearing 40 different hats. There really probably isn't in a startup a pure CSM role that what you're doing is you're loving on every customer, no matter how small, because you need them. You need them to build your base. And so that begins to shift over time where you can begin to differentiate between roles and you need to, right? Because you need to pay more attention to the customers you really want to retain because you really don't even know which are your target customers for a while when you're really small.
Yeah.
And so I think the difference is that at the very startup end, every customer is important, and everyone is essentially playing the role of the CSM from the CEO on down. And then you really start looking at that starts changing as the business grows, as as the ICP becomes clear, and you're clearer on where you want to invest those post-sales dollars. It's not that you don't want to pay attention to the smaller customers, but you've kind of said, listen, if they churn, we don't want that, but we're not going to invest in them not churning. And so that's kind of the difference, early on. I mean, anybody that's worked at a small startup, which I have, you want every single customer, you want to keep every single one because you have to, and then that begins to shift as you grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and just add that, someone that worked, advised different capacities in startups over the years. Obviously, we built up one as well now with Webster over the years. I think one of the things that is really interesting, most of the models that we, I think about, talk about when we think about customer success team, SaaS, consumption based, so on and so forth, they're fundamentally built on not just the initial sale, but on the actual retention of the customer. That's really where the model comes into play, and that's where it becomes effective and over time really profitable once you reach some scale. So built into that, you need to manage the customers properly, and you need to make sure that they're staying with you as long as possible. And I think in terms of building from a startup perspective, CS, one of the things that I always like to think about is not always planning for scale, because as a startup, you're not really, if you're at 5 or 10 million, 15 million, you're not really thinking as much about the 50 or 100 in your day-to-day operations or in your yearly plan, as you are about getting to the next 5 million in ARR and so on and so forth. But I think with CS, instead of just planning for that scale and setting up for it, is creating the baseline for the scaling to that level. And what I mean by that is a lot of times I think in the startup mode, we forget to set up the proper processes, the proper data management, the proper kind of checks and balances. So what happens often is we get by doing a lot of new business as a startup and growing to a certain level, and then you start hitting some critical mass and it becomes really hard to grow. And that's kind of the classic when, especially if the leadership maybe doesn't have a lot of CS experience from the past, we'll start looking at it with the board and say, wait, we need to make sure our customers are not churning a lot, or we need to grow the customer base. But you haven't set up the base, the foundation for it properly, going back a few years or a few million ARR. So now turning that ship around, that once was a speedboat that was very agile and you can make changes very quickly, now it takes a lot of time to do. So I think for startups, actually thinking about the foundation that you're setting up, from data, process, methodology, culture, and CS side, and so on and so forth, is as important actually as the long-term planning and putting robust systems in place. That will come later, but actually creating the foundation for it so you can continue building on that as a startup, scale up, and growth stage company. And over time, is really critical to continue that scale and that growth without having to stop along the way and redo a lot of things and rethink the baseline of what you've done for many years. So I think that's just something to think about, that foundation that you're setting early on as a startup.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed, and that's a good point. I in no way meant to say it. Even though everyone's being a ninja, you should absolutely be thinking
For
about,
sure. For sure.
totally. And I think that would actually make things easier when you start bifurcating roles if the right things are in place. So really good point. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think this like the ninja concept. Actually, I was talking to some peers yesterday. Is like we have this history of CS being known as being like the hero department, the one who's going to go in and fix it all. And I definitely see a change in that now, where we are being seen as more of a strategic driver for measurable things that can be measured with data like product adoption, right? And other leading indicators to retention. Do you agree, Mahesh? Do you see that kind of change in the strategic role that CS is making from being the team who like saves the day in the quarter versus the team who like prevents that from happening in the first place?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing that, right? We moved on from being, defensive, take care of customer, be a good friend of the customer, right? That whole relationship game and defensive game is long gone, and now we're focused on really proactive, prescriptive, journeys for our customers. We're really thinking through what our customers might need before they need, right? So more from reactive to proactive. Um, and we again got a little bit into the defensive game due to the current macroeconomic environment, right? And the sprawl of applications, right? There's so many products that do many things in an organization. Buying a ton of those products, it's starting to rationalize. So CSMs then, go back to defensive role, but of a different kind of, like, focus on really stickiness and value in order to defend that revenue. Um, and less so on let's get this customer out to dinner in order to get the renewal. That never happens anymore. And so what's the positive change there is, I would say, as a silver lining, is advances in AI that is allowing us to figure out sooner than normally we would where our customers are getting stuck, where do we need to give help, how do we personalize that help for the customer. So yeah, definitely we moved a long way from just being that catch all to retention to now more of a strategic function that really is thinking in terms of doing everything in the service of growth and resilience of the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's really the new CSM or CS role is about proactive care. And yeah, there's always going to be some amount of I'm kind of doing tech support now and again because my customer asks me a question and I'm just going to answer them. But I think that is the perfect model. I will say that um, one of the important things for CSMs to be able to do with tools like RevSetter, for example, is to fully explain when a customer has gone yellow or red, kind of
Mhm.
what's really required to get them to green. I have this thing called path to green plans, and often it's and again the CSM role, it used to be like, well, you got to close these 3 support tickets, and I'm going to beat on you until you do that. Really, it should be more holistic, where the CSM like, look, this customer signed a year ago with these expectations, we've achieved these outcomes, but to really get them fully green, they need a session with the head of product on the roadmap. They need to be included in the beta for this new feature. We need to get this one bug fix that they've had outstanding for a while. So I think the CSM plays a steward role in crafting these paths to green plans for customers that's way more strategic than it used to be. It used to just be about, hey, support person, where's ticket 345? Where's ticket 678? Now it's really like, my customer and I have aligned that for them to be happy, and customers are reasonable, they're not like fix every bug ever. They play the role of like aligning with the customer on what health looks like and then collaborating across the organization to make those actions happen. And that is way more strategic than it used to be. It really used to be that CSM was just like a thin layer above support. And so I'm seeing that happening because even if you do a great job, you will have customers who are not perfectly green. And how you handle that and the relationship that the CSM has with them to enable hey, you and I both know you're not happy. And I know that just fixing all your bugs wouldn't make you happy. So let's talk about what would. And then running that program, that seems to be an increasing role for CSMs, especially with larger customers, because customers are reasonable business people. They want to get to green and they want it to be an actual thing that can happen versus some pie in the sky. You're going to respond to every ticket within 5 minutes kind of thing. So I think that's a second. It's a reactive role, but it's still very strategic.
Ooh, I love the P to G, path to green.
Yeah.
And that's
And
awesome.
honestly, for anybody who thinks about that, like I'm a fan of just being very transparent with your customer. Like, let's build this together. Let's
Yeah.
agree on what good looks like. Not perfect, good. And then when we get there, we can smile and say, great, now let's move on. So
Mm.
it's not some like, I think if we did these things, they'd be happy. Like you're almost never totally right. So be transparent. And tools like website are going to be really great at helping with that.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. And as you're talking about this, it reminds me of like the need to align that with revenue as well. So
Mhm.
we have had Jan Young come speak at a previous Pay It Forward event, and she talked about how to become a post-sales revenue leader in
Mhm.
CS, right, and how to get really comfortable using revenue driven language to describe the kind of things that you're doing. One of the points of like debate is whether you should classify your CS team as OPEX or COGS, operating expenses or cost of goods sold. And I am curious for everyone's feedback on this point, if they tend to lean towards one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, true to our discipline, the answer I think we can start every answer with "it
It
depends."
depends.
Right? Right. So it depends how CS is positioned in the organization, in the business model, and what that team is doing. If it's the stuff that's directly tied to delivery of the product and the contract, like onboarding, implementation, tech support, that's COGS, right? Because without that, you won't fulfill the contract. So that's where you call it the cost of that magic of getting that revenue. On the other hand, we also have customer success teams focused on long-term, relationship management, renewals, upsells, basically driving growth. That's OpEx. Now, today we are doing a little bit of both. And so it's very important to be, first of all, be friends with your finance department, your CFO. They will provide you the guidance that allows you to be in compliance with, the accounting regulations, but also more importantly, address what the board needs to see, right? If you're not putting the costs in the right buckets, your boards don't see whether you're becoming more efficient, what's your productivity, and so on. So sometimes, people have, thought of putting, uh, stuff in OpEx in order to show better gross margin by removing stuff from COGS. But really they are, delivering the product. So it kind of makes your margins on either side looks good or bad. I would just advocate for, transparency and be completely aligned with how your CFO wants to present the books, in those accounting or legal terms.
Yeah, knowing that
Yeah.
weighs down your profit, you still have to kind of go with the flow of what your company is aligning to. But at the same time, if you can prove like, hey, we're doing stuff that's generating growth, then you might be able to influence the decision.
Yeah, and I think that's a critical point, because I think a lot of times, I've been in a lot of executive teams having to report or been reported to, and you look at these numbers, and every company will do a little bit differently, right? So you'll have some type of definitions that you go after. They'll be universal, but still slightly different, and we know how that goes when it comes to gross retention and net retention, what's included in all these different things. But I think for COGS and OPEX, they are fairly direct, and I think the explanation that you gave, or the outline, Mahesh, was really good in terms of what should go where. But one of the things that I've seen really effective is, as a CS leader, is to actually not just ask where does my cost go, so I know, but doing three other things that I think usually are really effective. One is ask for the CS specific cost, whether that's under COGS or OPEX, to also be broken out in the reporting, so you can create some CS specific benchmark to see how you're driving that, because a lot of times that cost will be lumped into the total number as is, and then even if you're becoming more efficient, it doesn't mean that the numbers are becoming more efficient, and the work that you're doing is not really reflected from an efficiency standpoint or a growth standpoint. In some instances, growth is easier to capture because you'll have other metrics that will be good at capturing that, like net retention and ARR growth and so on, but actually breaking that out. The second thing that I think is really impactful third thing really outside of benchmarking and breaking it out, is actually pitching what your department is doing or should be doing, and how that should then impact if you're under COGS or OPEX. So I think a lot of times we just kind of live with the fact, okay, we're positioned. A lot of times we'll be under COGS as a CS organization historically, because that's what it's been from the beginning. So even as CS evolves, it stays that way because the reporting needs to stay consistent. But I think if you're positioning why the organization on the CS side is actually maybe 10% driving COGS, but 90% is spending their time on driving OPEX related costs with renewals, expansion, growth, why it should actually be positioned under there. The benefit is not really on the financial numbers themselves. in reality, that they don't really affect you as a CS leader. But what affects you though is as a leader, getting resources, getting budget approval, getting more buy-in to what you're doing. If you're impacting OPEX versus COGS, you typically tend to get a lot more resources to work with because you're driving things that are driving growth and revenue in that way instead. So I think positioning yourself, breaking it out so you can show how you're improving that over time, but then also pitching why you should be under OPEX and why those activities that you're doing will matter for the growth. Actually will benefit you a ton because you'll be getting a lot more resources and budget approval from the board and beyond as you start scaling and as you require more resources to be effective. So don't kind of just sit and wait and get an answer on what you are defined as CS, but actually what should you be and why.
Yeah, and I would just add one last thing, which especially if you're going to be sort of lobbying for OpEx, because you're a strategic driver of revenue and retention, is make sure you can get the data to do your reporting. Make sure that one of the early things you do is put in place things that will enable you to show the connection between the work your team is doing and things that are in that OpEx bucket. Because you get yourself in there, and then unless you can show a direct connection between the data, there will always be a push to get you out of there, right? And really call you put you in the gross margin bucket. So that sort of gets to, I think, the point you were making earlier, which is sort of the underlying machinery is important, but in my view, more important if that's where you want to land, just because proving that connection becomes more critical.
So the data, for example, would be for customers who go through the Path to Green program, they generate this much revenue, or they're
Right.
this much.
Or what's the connection between, the cost, what you're spending on CSMs and expansion revenue, for example. Or what's the overall renew rate. But you can look at leading indicators, things like look at health scores against, renewal forecasts. So you can sort of connect the activity much more directly with data that lives in the OpEx bucket. Just because, have from experience, you sort of lobby to get in there, so you're not in the COGS bucket. And then those questions will prove to me that, your team is actually impacting these numbers. So you need to make sure you can do that.
Yeah, easier said than done. Involves a lot of relationship management. And I think we're in this topic of like the metrics and linking to financial metrics. So I'd love to pivot and include this view that Mahesh was kind enough to share on the calculation that he's found success in improving the ROI of CS. Now, I would say that when we talked about this session before, there's no like one magic formula, but I do think it's very helpful to give our audience something to work from. And so, Mahesh, I wonder if you could just talk us through kind of what went into this calculation.
Yeah, so this is really very high level, and the caution I'll throw in here is you could go crazy about making this like really perfect as if you're going to Mars or something. I would advise to keep it simple. Really, the ROI can be measured by figuring out what is the CS impact that you're creating, which all CS leaders down to CSM level should be aware of, and divide that by the CS investment that you're making. This is where again you make friends with your finance organization, with your CFO to understand. So CS impact really is all about the revenue that we are driving, growth, retention, any savings through programs like online education, right? Forums and so on, faster time to value, for example, right? That gets our customers to use our products sooner. So that all goes into the bucket of impact. Hopefully, everyone's listening here takes Hyder's advice and creates that data foundation to measure that. And then from the finance org, you get investment information on people, the cost of your tools and technology, and the various programs that you're running. So just a simple example here: if you are responsible for revenue retention and growth, you retain $1 million in revenue and 500K in expansion, and that costs you a CSM and a tool and a couple programs for 300K. So 1.5 million divided by 300K, you are returning 500% ROI on CS. So that's really a very simple way, and that this can continue for very long time until you have role specialization and geographically distributed teams and expansion of the roles. This formula can take you a very long way into like a Series C plus kind of stage.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing this. I am curious, when you've got programs here, how would you define a program versus a technology or people cost?
Yeah, so a program is, let's say, a user group or user community. So,
Okay.
we have a community team that, for example, in Workato currently runs 12 events per geography. That's 36 events overall. So that's a cost to us to run those 36 events, $10,000 per event, right?
Yeah.
And the cost of that team. Plus the swag and everything. So that's cost of one program is like $500,000 annually for us. And we take similar programs and kind of take that all under that CS investment bucket and are able to say that how what kind of impact that we had on any kind of retention efforts or product adoption and reference or advocacy generation.
I love that. Yeah, this is fascinating. I think it's something that not enough people do. So thank you again for sharing. I'm curious, Diane, Haida, what's your feedback on this kind of formula for proving ROI?
Um, I think it's more art than science.
Yeah.
Um, I think like, and I keep coming back to the data, right? To the extent, and unfortunately, for especially for newish companies, you're relying, the best data is data over time. And
Mm.
so, if you've got a company that's been in business for a couple of years and you've got, you really don't have any way of connecting, what you're spending on past churn or past expansion. And so your best bet, right, is, and to really show this is, unless there's some immediate outcome from programs that you invest in, is to be able to say, and I recently had a customer that's been around for, I don't know, 15 years, and they were able to really see the difference between when they added certain kinds of team members post sale to, and to connect the data, the activity data between what those people were doing and changes in retention and expansion. And so I love this formula. I just think that the challenge is you usually need data over a period of time to
Mm.
prove it. And so for a very young company, it's a little bit of a leap of faith, right? And also believing that this role exists because smart people have decided it matters and have evidence that it does. And then over time, using a formula as evidence to support the investment. So yeah, it depends on where you are in your company life cycle.
Haida, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say I agree definitely. I think that the data, as anything else, in terms of proving ROI or value, you need enough data to plug in to any of the formulas that you have to see the true impact of them. I really like this way of looking at it, especially if you have data over time and you have enough history and current data to actually look at it and then make decisions based off of it. And I think one of the things where I'm kind of in agreement with both of you because the formula is really science. Diane, you said it's art as well. And I think CS is really somewhere in that intersection between art and science. If we look at new business sales, there are a lot of sales velocity formulas and things that are very straight to the point, plug and play with specific KPIs. You plug things in, you know what's going to happen at the end of the day. And I think CS initially was only art, and that's where we, gut check on things and relying on the CSM's feeling of how things are going. And then I think we've become a lot more data driven in CS. I think sometimes we maybe take it overboard and blindly look at the data and just believe it at face value because the health score is saying green or red or yellow, and that's all she wrote. So I think it's somewhere in between. And I think as a company, coming back to the classic, it depends. You need to really look at what's your stage, Where are you in terms of the customer base, your ICP, the type of customer that you sell to, the internal structure that you have, and as you figure these things out, I think you'll find the formula that works for you. And I think it's somewhere again always in between that art and science when it comes to CS. And merging those two together in an effective way. That's, I think, when you really can take things to the next level.
Yeah, I'll just add, we can talk about data all day long, but most decisions have a lot of emotional components. So don't forget the power of anecdotal evidence, the storytelling about the CS impact.
Yeah,
It's not strictly CS ROI because it can't be captured in a formula. It's an art as well, to tell a good story about
absolutely.
CS impact. So yeah, definitely don't overlook, that anecdotal evidence that you can bring to your leadership and create that, impression about what CS is bringing to the table.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, and I was going to just say last little note there on that is, I mean, we see it every day. I think in every CS organization, the super happy customer churning and the customer that you rarely ever talk to, renewing year after year after year and buying more stuff, randomly. And the data there would tell you one thing or the other, but reality tells you something else. So I think always be mindful of that as well and blend that into to not replace the data completely and not just do it as art, but finding that balance, I think is important.
Right, and I think actually that storytelling thing is even more important when you're early stage, just because you won't in
Absolutely.
fact have the data, and by the way, the data may not always tell the story you want to tell. So, yeah, 100% agree that telling the stories of customers that can't say enough about their CSM because they talk to them all the time and get help from them, like that's very important in getting the position funded, especially early on.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is why AI is not taking our jobs away anytime soon.
This is why who, sorry?
This is why
AI.
AI is not taking our jobs anytime
Right,
soon.
right. Maybe it just doesn't have the right prompts yet. I'm just joking. No, Rod Cherkes, he is a consultant for CCOs, and he's been a CCO in the past at various companies. He did a Pay It Forward event with us recently where he talked about emphasizing the importance of building a strategic roadmap and socializing that and ensuring that other executives understand what it is that you're doing and where you're trying to go. Do you think that's critical to like tacking onto an ROI calculation?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
go on,
Go
Henry.
ahead. Okay, thank you. I was just gonna say, yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, we talked about earlier during this conversation, just the nature of CS. It kind of sits as that spider in the web within the organization. You're obviously frontline towards the customer and the different stakeholders externally, but then internally you're sitting there with stakeholders like product, sales, go to market, revenue operations, and beyond, and touching a lot of different marketing, of course, touching a lot of different things and aspects of the company. So I think as you're building your strategic plan and thinking about it, first of all, make sure that plan is not built in a silo, just looking at your CS metrics and what you know and what you believe the job should be, but actually looking at how does that impact the overall company's main goals and initiatives for the upcoming period. And some companies will plan a year ahead, some will plan 3 years ahead, whatever that might be. You need to be really aligned with how what your CS organization is doing is impacting those goals directly, because if they're not, they'll fall by the wayside in terms of importance, in terms of priority. And when you create that connection, then 99 out of 100 times, to be effective doing that, you do depend on other departments, you do depend on other stakeholders within the organization to help you execute on that plan and help provide some shared goals and shared incentives to manage those goals that you have and get there. So the more they can socialize that, the more they can bring it in and tie it to the overall company goals and initiatives, and then also see how can this benefit the marketing team's goals, right? If you look at, as for example, marketing, they typically will end up these days have some type of goal to drive revenue through leads and the different initiatives, and a good part of that can come from the customer side. So how can you involve the marketing leadership to align with some of the goals that you have with events and advocacy and so on and so forth? How can you bring the sales side in terms of case studies, and if you're doing enterprise early onboardings, pre-close and things of that nature? So I think thinking about that strategically, finding those aligned and shared incentives and goals with other leaders within your organization, and then tying it to the overall company's main specific goals and priorities. If you do that, then you can be really effective with your CS strategies and the way that you're deploying them within the organization.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And just to kind of give an example of how we do it, we have had similar experience at MuleSoft and Dataiku. So we have a notion of VMT, is vision, methods, and targets, which actually gets the entire company, all the teams aligned to the top level. So we start with the CEO level or the board level, VMTs. And then every department kind of, takes that and translates into our goals. So, for example, if one of the strategic goal is revenue retention, it's not just CSM organization's role. Marketing has to play certain role. Product certainly has to play certain role. Looking at our data, we want to be able to say, hey, our retention really is somewhat correlated with how fast we address enhancement request and bugs. So product takes on responsibility of that goal, but translates it into metrics that are in their context and domain and control that they can improve. CES teams will take the same company level metric and translate to our internal actions and KPIs that contribute. So this is how we have this tree structure where this information flows down to the CSM level. So in my organization, if you were to go into Slack and look at profile of an individual, you see their VMTs and you see the connection in our application for the VMT of an individual or a team. You see that path, you can trace it back to the company objective. So none of us are doing anything working towards a KPI in isolation, and all of those KPIs are in some way or form connected through that web and that relationship to the top level strategy.
Yeah, yeah. That's so important to connect back to the focus of the business, right? Which I think across the board is NRR, net revenue
Yeah.
retention, right? And
Yeah,
what?
it
Go
go ahead,
ahead.
sorry. No, I was going to say, NRR is obviously the top level metric, but, we kind of, focus on GRR as well,
Mhm.
especially for and product consumption. A lot of businesses are transitioning to usage-based business models.
Mhm.
So, retaining that adoption momentum or adoption usage velocity is extremely important to get to the GRR and then to the NRR. So we kind of see this as, step
Yeah,
ladder to get to NRR. I have to go through this adoption step and the GRR step